40,000. That is how far back the documented evidence goes for what I'm going to talk about today. Not about 180 years when the American spiritualist movement started in 1848. Not 500, not 1,000. 40,000 years and counting back. 40,000 years places this work in a different category. Not a movement, not a trend, but a long, unbroken thread of human beings trying to understand what continues after this body dies. It's older than agriculture, older than writing, older than most of what we call civilization. Before I ever knew the history, before I ever knew the lineage, I walked into Lilydale in 2019 with nothing but curiosity and a sense that something in me was being pulled towards a question I didn't yet know how to name. I didn't realize then that I was stepping into a story that started long before me. The painted caves of Chauvet in France are more than 30,000 years old. Some of the oldest paintings dating to around 36,000 years. Altamira in Spain, tens of thousands of years old. And in Indonesia, older still, at least 51,000 years, the oldest known figurative cave art in the world. And in the deepest chambers of those caves, the ones that you have to crawl into through narrow passages in the dark, there are paintings of half human, half animal figures. Paintings of people in trance. People reaching towards something beyond the ordinary world. The shaman, the intermediary, the one who sits between the living and whatever continues. Every culture on earth has had one. Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, Rome, China, Persia, Mongolia, the Philippines, West Africa, the Amazon, indigenous cultures across every continent. The oldest written record of consulting the dead comes from ancient Assyria, nearly 4 millennia ago. So when two sisters in Hydesville, New York, claimed to be communicating with a spirit in 1848, they were not inventing something new. They were participating in something as old as grief itself. That is the frame I want to hold this video, this story in this video in. Not as American curiosity, not as a Victorian fad, but as one expression in one place in time of something our species has apparently always done. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that the history is larger than the categories we've tried to fit it into. So, to understand the American chapter of that larger story, you need one piece of geography. Western and central New York in the early 19th century was not a calm place intellectually. Religious revivals, new religious movements, social reform, abolition, women's rights, temperance, utopian communities. Mormonism started there. The Seneca Falls Convention happened there. Their Underground Railroad ran through there. The intensity was so concentrated that observers called the region the burned over district, as in the spiritual fire had moved through so completely there was no fuel left unconverted. This was a region of people who had decided the old answers weren't good enough and were urgently building new ones. That context mattered because what happened in Hydesville in 1848 did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a place already asking every possible version of the question, what do we actually believe and why? And that question, what do we actually believe and why, is where another thread enters the story. Before we go further, the phrase free thinker, it's in the name of the organization that founded Lilydale. The Religious Society of Freethinkers. It's in the first name of the community itself, the Cassadaga Lake Free Association. So what does it mean, actually? The term first appeared in the 17th century to describe people who examined the basis of traditional beliefs instead of accepting them without question. Not rejecting belief, not requiring disbelief. Just you look at it yourself. Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher and Nobel laureate whose 1944 essay, The Value of Free Thought, argued that free thinking is about method, not doctrine. He put it this way: what makes a free thinker is not his beliefs, but the way in which he holds them. If you hold a belief because you've actually examined it, your thought is free, however odd your conclusions may seem. Free thought is a method, not a destination. What Russell offered me was a way out of believing I had to believe, a way to let my day-to-day experience remain open, provisional, and free to shift when something real clarified it. So, okay, back to Hydesville, New York. Maggie and Kate Fox claim to be communicating with a spirit through mysterious rappings. The story spreads through Rochester immediately through the abolitionist and women's rights networks. Isaac and Amy Post, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, William Lloyd Garrison. The first social network of spiritualism was the same network fighting for abolition and women's rights. Not adjacent, the same people. And the moral atmosphere they created mattered. Douglass and Truth weren't spiritualists, but they helped shape a culture where the soul of every human being was understood to have worth. Once you insist on that, you can't help but wonder what becomes of that soul when the body is gone. And once you ask that, you're already in the territory Hydesville opened. The Fox sisters went national fast, and then the honest part came, years later. In 1888, Margaret Fox confessed the rappings were a hoax. But you know what? The movement continued anyways, because whatever was actually happening, the investigations, the community, the evidential experiences, none of that was resting on the Fox sisters' performance. When you have 40,000 years of documented human experience reporting the same fundamental practice across every culture and continent, two sisters cracking their knuckles on the bottom of a table doesn't settle the question. The community that would become Lilydale had three names over time. Cassadaga Lake Free Association, 1879. The City of Light, 1903, and finally, Lilydale Assembly in 1906. Those names trace a clear evolution from a free thought association to a spiritual ideal to a formal assembly with doctrine and hierarchy. And in that evolution, something essential thins out. The method Russell described. The wish to find out replaced by the requirement to believe something. And that loss matters because the earliest spiritualists were not operating inside a closed system. They were part of the same networks fighting for abolition and women's rights. Lilydale is on the National Votes for Women trail. That is not a coincidence. In the 19th century, women had almost no legitimate public platforms. That is the truth. But a woman in trance speaking for the dead, apparently that was acceptable. Susan B. Anthony spoke at Lilydale, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Isabella Beecher Hooker, Reverend Anna Shaw, and Victoria Woodhull. The Freethought, the suffrage, the abolitionism, and the spiritualism were not separate movements. They were the same network operating from the same conviction. Direct experience matters more than inherited authority. And while that was happening in America, another form of inquiry was taking shape in the United Kingdom. In 1882, the Society for Psychical Research formed, not as a devotional group, but as a scientific one. Cambridge intellectuals, Sidgwick, Myers, Gurney, set out to examine the same phenomena that filled Victorian parlors, but with the tools of their disciplines. Scientists like Sir William Crookes, naturalists like Alfred Russel Wallace, physicists like Sir Oliver Lodge, psychologists like William James, even Freud and Jung at the edges, all took part in the inquiry. For a significant stretch of intellectual history, the survival of consciousness was treated as a legitimate scientific question. Victorian wonder didn't disappear, it simply changed rooms. And over time, all of these currents, the ancient impulse, the reformist courage, the scientific curiosity, it all settled into institutions. In London, the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain has been operating since 1872. Originally as the Marylebone, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, Spiritualist Association. The London Spiritual Alliance, which later became the College of Psychic Studies, acquired its South Kensington townhome in 1925. And Arthur Findlay donated Stansted Hall to become a college dedicated entirely to the study and development of mediumship. What began in caves and moved through parlors and laboratories now lived in buildings with libraries, classrooms, and lineages of teachers. That is the long line from the shaman in the cave to the abolitionists and suffragists, to the Victorian mediums, to the scientists who tried to measure the invisible, to the institutions that carried the questions forward. And when that long line reaches Lilydale, something becomes clear. It began with wonder without dogma, and over time became a place that still honors inquiry, but within a more formal spiritualist container. Mystery got a bylaws committee, which is how humans tend to ruin and preserve things at the same time. Once the pattern was visible, the shape of the place made more sense. To me, the spiritualism being practiced there carried a distinctly Christian tone. Again, to me, my opinion. Far from the Freethought impulse that founded the Cassadaga Lake Free Association, far from the open inquiry it all began with. Doctrine, hierarchy, interpretation from above. And underneath it all, the familiar dynamics of any small closed community. The institution had drifted from the impulse. The impact of that drift wasn't dramatic. It was more like a quiet pressure, the feeling that the pull to belong could outweigh the pull towards truth. Mediumship remained intact, however. The container around it had changed. So what does being a free thinker actually look like? Russell said a free thinker must be free from two things: the force of tradition and the tyranny of your own passions. The force of tradition is inherited certainty, the frameworks that feel like facts because they've always been there. The tyranny of your own passions is the belief you hold because giving it up would cost you something. When I first involved myself with the Lilydale Assembly, I wasn't looking for any belief system. I'm actually super opposed to belief systems. But I was following a pull, being met by experiences I didn't yet have language for. And because I admired the community's origins, I assumed I'd find more of that early Freethought impulse than the opposite. I did want the sense of community. I did want the shared language. But I couldn't ignore the tension between the language of open inquiry and the reality of a defined set of principles you were expected to sign on to. I wasn't blind to it. I simply interpreted it generously, at least at first. I assumed the structure was formal, but the people were free. Over time, it became clear that the structure shaped the freedom more than the freedom shaped the structure. Freethought for me wasn't about tearing anything down. It built something. It harmonized things that had never sat together comfortably. It integrated what I was experiencing with what I actually knew. I didn't leave Lilydale empty-handed. I left with my mediumship developed. Who knew? I left with my knowing sharpened and a much clearer understanding of what kind of container I needed, which was, as it turns out, one I build myself. And here is the thing I want to name carefully. My spiritual atheism is itself a freethinker's position. I'm a labeled atheist because I have examined my own direct experience of mediumship and have yet to find a deity in it, or any relationship at all to dogma or organized religions to date. Just consciousness, just the ongoing relational recognizing awareness of people who have died, communicating with genuine specificity through me. Freethought helped me shake off the feeling that I had to believe anything at all in order to accept my experiences as evidence that life continues after these bodies give out. I gave myself permission to stop trying to believe before I could trust what I was actually experiencing. So my conclusions may seem odd to people on both sides. You know, the devoutly religious may find my atheism troubling. The devoutly secular may find my mediumship troubling. Russell said free thought is free, however odd the conclusions may seem. I got here by following the evidence of my own experience, not by inheriting someone else's framework. That, by at least Russell's definition, and mine today, makes the thought free. And since I'm naming things plainly, here is the model that has made the most sense of what I've lived. Consciousness has a physical body while we're alive, but it isn't produced by the body. It continues when the body expires. It is our existence ongoing, not generated by the brain, but expressed through it. What I do as a medium reaches beyond me. It has to, but everything that lets me do it is mine. My own awareness, my own honesty, my own willingness to keep noticing what I know. The work that crosses beyond me is also the work that's most personal. And here's where I return to the 40,000 years. That shaman in the cave was not following doctrine, was not a member of an organization, was not building towards any credential on a piece of paper. They were simply doing what humans have always done, sitting with the question of what continues and trying to reach it. The Cassadaga Lake Free thinkers understood something the later institutional versions forgot, in my opinion. This work belongs to open inquiry. The moment you tell someone what their direct experience means, before they've had the chance to find out for themselves, you've stepped away from the original impulse. The original Freethought impulse was not the rejection of spiritual experience. It was the insistence that spiritual experience belongs to the person having it. No authority gets to own the interpretation. That is what I am trying to hold here for this video. I am not the authority on what consciousness means. I am not the authority on what happens after death. I am an instrument, and what passes through me is yours to determine. That is the oldest version of this work there is, and it is still available. If you came for the history, you now know the lineage, at least in part. If you came for the personal story, you now know the bit of reckoning I had. Both are part of the same story. The question that started all of this, what happens when someone we love dies? Can anything of them continue? Can that continuation be reached? That question does not belong to any organization. It is the oldest question our species has asked. And you know what? It will outlast every institution built around it. And the free thought position, the one I keep returning to, the one that lets me stay honest, stay curious, stay in relationship with what I actually experience, that position is not radical because it's new. It is radical because it refuses to stop asking. We question what limits us, we honor what fuels us, and we follow the pull of real intuition. Free thinking. Know yourself, own your knowing, trust your good work. That's the whole spell.